The arrow left the bow before Aldric's mind caught up with his hands. It flew through the morning mist, silent as death, and buried itself in the throat of a man he had never seen before. The man crumpled, his sword clattering against the rocks, his body folding like a puppet with cut strings. 3 other men froze. Their eyes snapped toward the tree line, toward the shadow that had just killed their companion, toward Aldric. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the woman screamed again. She was tall, taller than most men Aldric had known. Her hair blazed like autumn fire, a cascade of copper and crimson that spilled over her shoulders as she struggled against the ropes binding her wrists. Her dress was torn, her face was bloodied, and her eyes found Aldric in the shadows. And in them, he saw something that would haunt him forever. Not fear, hope, the kind of desperate, fragile hope that only appears when you've already accepted death. The 3 remaining men drew their swords. Aldric knocked another arrow. He had spent 15 years avoiding trouble, 15 years hiding in the forest, hunting deer, speaking to no one, 15 years building walls around a heart that had been shattered too many times. And in one moment, one scream, he had thrown it all away. The first man charged. Aldric's second arrow took him in the chest. The third man fell with an arrow through his eye before he could take 3 steps. The fourth man, the largest, the cruelest looking, grabbed the woman and pressed a blade to her throat. "Come out," he bellowed. "Come out, or I open her neck." Aldric stepped from the shadows. His quiver was empty. His bow was useless. All he had left was a hunting knife and 15 years of regret. But he kept walking, because something in that woman's eyes told him this wasn't just about saving her life. It was about saving his own. Before we continue, comment below where you're watching from. 3 days earlier, Aldric had been exactly where he wanted to be, alone. His cabin sat in a valley so deep in the Thornwood Forest that most maps didn't even acknowledge its existence. He had built it himself, 15 years ago, when he had first fled the world of men. Log by log, stone by stone, a monument to solitude. He woke before dawn, as always, checked his traps, as always, skinned the rabbits he caught, salted the meat, stretched the pelts on wooden frames. Routine, rhythm, the steady pulse of a life designed to need nothing and no one. By midday, he was tracking a deer, a big one, judging by the prints. A stag, probably 8 or 9 years old. Enough meat to last a month. Enough to make the long trek to Millbrook worthwhile. He followed the trail north, deeper into parts of the forest even he rarely visited. The trees grew thicker here, the canopy blocking out the sun. Mushrooms glowed faintly on rotting logs. The air tasted of moss and decay. Aldric moved like a ghost. Years of practice had taught him to step without sound, to breathe without notice, to become part of the forest itself. That's when he heard the voices. Men's voices. Rough. Angry. Coming from somewhere ahead. Aldric stopped. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back. Other people meant complications. Complications meant pain. He had learned that lesson 15 years ago. When no, he wouldn't think about that. He started to retreat. Then he heard the scream. High. Desperate. Female. A sound of pure terror that cut through the forest like a blade. Aldric's hands moved before his mind could stop them. He knocked an arrow, crept forward, found a ridge overlooking a small clearing, and saw her, the woman. She was on her knees in the center of the clearing, surrounded by 4 men in leather armor. Her wrists were bound behind her back. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, staining her pale skin crimson. But it was her hair that caught his attention. Red. Not the dull auburn of autumn leaves, but true red, a blazing, impossible color that seemed to glow even in the dim forest light. It fell past her shoulders in wild tangles, like flames frozen in time. She was tall, even kneeling, she was nearly as tall as the men standing over her. Her frame was lean but strong, the build of someone who had known hard work and harder times. One of the men grabbed her hair and yanked her head back. "Last chance, witch. Tell us where you hid it, or we start cutting pieces off." The woman spat in his face. The man roared and raised his sword. That's when she screamed. And that's when Aldric stopped thinking. Now, 3 days later, he stood in that same clearing with an empty quiver and a knife in his hand. The large man, their leader, apparently held the red-haired woman against his chest, his blade pressed to her throat. A thin line of blood had already appeared where the edge bit into her skin. "Drop the knife," the man commanded. "Drop it, or she dies." Aldric didn't move. His mind was racing, calculating distances and angles. The man was using the woman as a shield. A thrown knife might hit her instead. And even if it didn't, even if he was fast enough, the man could slash her throat before he fell. There was no good option. But there was an option. "All right," Aldric said, raising his hand slowly. "All right, you win." He bent down, placing the knife on the ground. The large man grinned. "Smart. Now kick it away." Aldric kicked the knife into the underbrush. "Good. Now turn around and kneel." Aldric turned, started to kneel. And as he did, he palmed the small throwing blade he kept hidden in his boot. The man never saw it coming. The blade flew, not at the man, at the rope holding the woman's wrists. It was a desperate throw, a stupid throw, the kind of throw that only worked in bard's tales and fever dreams. But it worked. The rope split, the woman's hands came free, and in the same instant, she drove her elbow backward into her captor's ribs with a force that made Aldric wince from 20 feet away. The man staggered, his grip on the blade loosened. Aldric was already moving. He crossed the clearing in 3 strides, slamming into the man before he could recover. They went down together, rolling in the dirt, fists and knees and elbows searching for soft targets. The man was bigger, stronger, better trained, but Aldric had spent 15 years fighting for survival in a forest that didn't forgive mistakes. He found the man's throat with his forearm and pressed. Pressed until the struggling stopped. Pressed until the body went limp. Pressed until it was over. Aldric rolled off the corpse, gasping for breath. His ribs ached. His vision swam. Blood dripped from a cut on his scalp that he didn't remember receiving. A shadow fell over him. He looked up. The red-haired woman stood above him, silhouetted against the gray sky. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving, her copper hair wild around her face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she extended her hand. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was deeper than he expected, rougher, like smoke and honey mixed together. "You saved my life." Aldric stared at her hand, at her face, at those eyes green as spring leaves, sharp as broken glass. He had spent 15 years avoiding this, avoiding people, avoiding connections, avoiding anything that could hurt him again. But he took her hand anyway. "You're welcome," he said. And with those 2 words, everything changed. Her name was Rowan, she told him as they walked, or rather, as she walked and he limped beside her, favoring the ribs that were almost certainly cracked. She talked easily, freely, as if they were old friends catching up, rather than strangers who had just killed 4 men together. "Rowan like the tree," she explained. "My mother had a strange sense of humor. Named me after a tree that wards off evil spirits." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Didn't work very well, did it?" "Who were those men?" Aldric asked. The laughter died. Her jaw tightened. "Bounty hunters, hired by a man named Lord Aldous Crane." The name meant nothing to Aldric. He said so. "Lucky you," Rowan said. "Lord Crane controls the Eastern Territories. Everything from the Silver River to the Iron Spine Mountains. Richest man in the region. Also, the cruelest." She touched the cut on her forehead, wincing. 3 months ago, his son died. "Fever," they said. But Crane doesn't believe in fevers. He believes in curses. In witchcraft. Aldric's eyes narrowed. "And he thinks you're a witch?" "He thinks I killed his son with sorcery." She laughed again, but there was no humor in it this time. "Because I was the healer who tried to save the boy. Because I have red hair and green eyes, and I'm taller than most of his knights. Because it's easier to blame a woman than admit that sometimes children just die." She stopped walking, turned to face him. "I'm not a witch, Archer. I'm a healer. I've spent my life trying to help people, and now, being hunted like an animal because a powerful man needs someone to blame for his grief." Aldric studied her face, looking for deception, for falsehood, for any sign that she was lying. He found none. "Where were you going?" he asked. "Before they caught you?" "North. There's a monastery in the mountains, the Brothers of the Silver Light. They take in refugees." Protect people from persecution. She paused. It's 3 weeks' travel from here, through Lord Crane's territory. 3 weeks, Aldric repeated. I know, it's suicide, but it's the only chance I have. She looked at him, really looked at him, her green eyes searching his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. You don't have to help me anymore. You've done enough. More than enough. Just point me north, and I'll my cabin. Aldric interrupted. It's half a day from here. You can rest. Eat. We'll figure out the rest in the morning. Rowan blinked. Aldric didn't answer. He just started walking. After a moment, he heard her footsteps following behind. The cabin was small, but Rowan looked at it like it was a palace. You built this yourself? Aldric nodded, feeding kindling into the hearth. 15 years ago. And you've lived here alone all that time? Yes. Why? The fire caught. Flames licked at the dry wood, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Because people hurt each other, Aldric said quietly. Because every time I've let someone close, I've lost them. Because it's easier to be alone than to survive another loss. He expected her to push, to ask questions, to demand his story, but she didn't. She just sat down on the floor near the fire, wrapped her arms around her knees, and stared into the flames. I understand, she said softly. More than you know. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Rowan spoke again. I had a family once, a husband, a daughter. Her voice was barely a whisper. There was a plague in our village. I was the healer. Everyone expected me to save them. She paused. I couldn't. Aldric's chest tightened. My husband died in my arms. My daughter, she was 4 years old. She called for me at the end, asked me to make it stop hurting. Rowan's voice cracked. I couldn't even do that. A tear slipped down her cheek, glowing orange in the firelight. After they were gone, I left. Wandered from village to village, healing whoever I could. Trying to atone, trying to prove that I wasn't useless. She laughed bitterly. And look where it got me. Hunted. Alone. Running for my life because I tried to save a dying boy. She looked up at Aldric. So yes, Archer, I understand why you built your walls. I understand why you hide. Because the world is cruel, and loss is inevitable, and sometimes the only way to survive is to stop caring. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But I've also learned something else. Something it took me years to accept. What? That walls don't protect you. They just make sure you suffer alone. Aldric said nothing, but her words echoed in his mind long after they both fell asleep. They left at dawn. Aldric had made his decision sometime in the darkest hours of the night, when sleep wouldn't come and Rowan's words kept circling in his head like crows around a corpse. Walls don't protect you. They just make sure you suffer alone. She was right. He had known it for years, buried deep beneath the routines and the silence and the careful emptiness he had cultivated. He had known it every time he woke in the dark, reaching for a wife who wasn't there. Every time he passed the small grave behind his cabin, the grave he visited every morning but never spoke about. He had built his walls to escape the pain, but the pain had been inside the walls all along. You're sure about this? Rowan asked as they packed supplies. 3 weeks through enemy territory, bounty hunters on our trail, Lord Crane's soldiers at every checkpoint. I'm sure. You could die. I've been dying for 15 years, Aldric said quietly. This is the first time I've had a reason to live. Rowan stared at him. Something shifted in her expression, surprise, maybe, or gratitude, or something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The first week was almost peaceful. Aldric led them through the deepest parts of the forest, along trails that existed on no map. They moved during the gray hours of dawn and dusk, resting during the bright midday when searchers would be most active. He taught Rowan to walk silently, to read the forest, to identify which plants were edible and which would kill you in minutes. She taught him to laugh again. It started small, a wry comment about the weather, a joke about his cooking, an observation so unexpected that a sound escaped his lips before he could stop it. A rusty, unfamiliar sound. Laughter. He had forgotten what it felt like. At night, they talked. Really talked. In a way Aldric hadn't done since. Since before, he told her about his wife, Mira, about their daughter, Lily, about the fever that had taken them both in the span of 3 days, leaving him alone in a cabin built for 3. Rowan listened without judgment, without pity. She simply listened, and somehow that was enough. She told him about her own losses, about the villages she had saved and the ones she couldn't, about the guilt that never faded, no matter how many lives she touched. "We carry the dead with us," she said one night, staring at the stars through a gap in the canopy. "They become part of who we are. The trick isn't to forget them, it's to let them guide us instead of haunt us." Aldric thought about Mira, about Lily, about the small grave behind his cabin. "How do you know the difference?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment. "When you think of them, do you feel only pain? Or do you also feel gratitude? Gratitude for the time you had, for the love you shared, for the way they changed you." Aldric closed his eyes. He thought of Mira's laugh, Lily's small hand in his, the way they had made him feel like he belonged somewhere. And for the first time in 15 years, the memory didn't just hurt, it also warmed. "Thank you," he whispered. Rowan didn't ask what for. She already knew. The second week, everything went wrong. They were crossing a ridge when they heard the horns. Hunting horns. Multiple directions, converging on their position. "They found us," Rowan breathed. Aldric grabbed her hand and ran. They fled through the forest, branches whipping their faces, rocks tearing at their feet. Behind them, the horns grew louder, closer. Dogs began to bay the deep, eager sound of hounds on a fresh scent. Aldric's mind raced. They couldn't outrun dogs, couldn't outrun horses. Their only hope was to break the trail, confuse the pursuit. "The river," he gasped. "Half a mile north. It's our only chance." They crashed through the underbrush, lungs burning, legs screaming. The river appeared through the trees, wide, fast, swollen with recent rain. "Can you swim?" Aldric shouted. "Yes." "Then jump." They leaped together, plunging into water cold enough to stop Aldric's heart. The current grabbed them immediately, dragging them downstream with terrifying force. Aldric fought to keep his head above water, to keep sight of Rowan's red hair, that impossible beacon in the chaos of white foam and gray water. They were swept around a bend, then another. The sounds of pursuit faded behind them. The water carried them into a narrow canyon, walls rising on either side like the hands of giants. Finally, after what felt like hours, the river widened and slowed. Aldric dragged himself onto a rocky shore, gasping, shivering, more dead than alive. Rowan crawled up beside him. For a long moment, they just lay there, breathing. Then, impossibly, Rowan started to laugh. "What?" Aldric managed between chattering teeth. "We're alive," she said, still laughing. "We're actually alive." Aldric stared at her, at this impossible woman with her fire-red hair plastered to her face, her clothes soaked, her body shaking with cold, and laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. And suddenly, he was laughing too. They lay on the rocks, half frozen, surrounded by enemies, with nothing but the clothes on their backs. And they laughed until they cried. They lost 3 days to the river. By the time they found their bearings, they were miles off course, deep in territory that Aldric didn't know. But they were also beyond the immediate search. The hunters had lost their trail. For now, they pressed on, moving faster now, pushing through the pain and exhaustion. The mountains loomed ahead, growing larger each day. The monastery was close. Safety was close. On the final night, they camped on a ridge overlooking a vast valley. Tomorrow, they would begin the climb into the mountains. Tomorrow, they would reach the monastery. Rowan sat beside Aldric, closer than she had before. Their shoulders touched. Neither moved away. "What will you do?" she asked. "After we reach the monastery?" Aldric had been avoiding that question, avoiding thinking about what came next. "Go back, I suppose. To my cabin, to my life. Your walls. My walls." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "What if you didn't?" Aldric turned to look at her. The moonlight silvered her hair, turning copper to platinum. Her green eyes were soft, and certain, an expression he had never seen on her before. "What do you mean?" "The monastery takes in anyone who needs protection, not just refugees from persecution. People who need a new start." She paused. "People who need a home. Aldric's heart was pounding. "Are you asking me to stay?" "I'm asking you to consider it." She looked away. "I know we've only known each other for 2 weeks. I know it's absurd, but these 2 weeks, they've been the first time in years that I've felt." She trailed off. "Felt what?" "Like myself. Like the person I was before everything went wrong." She turned back to him, her eyes glistening. "You did that, Aldric. You saw me not as a witch, not as a healer, not as a symbol or a scapegoat, just as me. And she reached out and touched his face. "I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you." Aldric covered her hand with his own. He thought about his cabin, his solitude, his walls. He thought about Mira and Lily, sleeping in the earth behind a home built for 3. And he thought about Rowan, about her laughter and her strength and her impossible red hair, about the way she made him feel alive again. "I spent 15 years hiding from the world," he said slowly. 15 years convinced that being alone was the same as being safe. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "But you showed me the truth. That safety without connection isn't safety at all. It's just a slower kind of death." He pulled back to look into her eyes. "If you'll have me, I'll stay." Rowan smiled a real smile, radiant and warm. "I'll have you, Archer." And there, on a ridge overlooking the valley, with the monastery waiting in the mountains above, Aldric kissed her. Gently, tenderly, like a promise, like a beginning. They reached the monastery the next evening. It was smaller than Aldric expected, a cluster of stone buildings clinging to the mountainside like stubborn weeds. But smoke rose from chimneys, and warm light glowed in windows, and the gates opened before they even knocked. A monk in gray robes greeted them. "We've been expecting you," he said, his voice kind. Rowan frowned. "Expecting us?" The monk smiled. "Word travels, even in the mountains. The healer who defied Lord Crane, the archer who saved her. Your story has given hope to many." He stepped aside, gesturing them in. "You're safe here, both of you, for as long as you need." They entered together, and as the gates closed behind them, Aldric felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. Peace. Not the empty peace of solitude, not the numb peace of walls and silence. Real peace. The kind that comes from belonging, from being seen, from knowing that you're not alone anymore. He looked at Rowan. She looked back. No words were needed. The years that followed were quiet ones, good ones. Aldric helped the monks maintain the monastery, his skills as a hunter and builder proving invaluable. Rowan established a healing practice, treating the refugees who found their way to those remote mountains. They built a life together, a real life, full of small moments and simple joys. Morning tea on the terrace, watching the sun rise over the peaks. Evening walks through the mountain meadows, hand in hand. Long conversations by the fire, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Lord Crane sent men twice. Both times, the mountains swallowed them. Eventually, he stopped looking. A healer with red hair wasn't worth the cost. And in a small chapel on a spring morning, with monks as witnesses and wildflowers in Rowan's hair, Aldric married her. Not because he had forgotten Mira, he would never forget Mira, but because Mira would have wanted him to live, to love again, to find his way back from the darkness. And Rowan had shown him the way. The final image, Aldric and Rowan standing on a balcony, looking out over the mountains. His arm is around her waist, her head rests on his shoulder. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the same color as her hair. Neither speaks. They don't need to. Some moments are too perfect for words. And after 15 years of silence, Aldric has finally found something worth more than peace. He has found home.